approximately 180,000 Zimbabweans employed in South Africa who are facing the imminent risk of expulsion have expressed relief following a court ruling that halted the government's intended action. Now, the Pretoria High Court declared the termination of their special residency permits by the South African government as unconstitutional. And many of these individuals have resided in South Africa for over a decade, having fled neighboring Zimbabwe amidst political instability and economic turmoil during the era of former President Robert Mugabe. Initially, in order to address the influx of Zimbabwean migrants, South Africa implemented special permits allowing them to work. However, in 2021, the government announced its decision to end the program. The Zimbabwe Immigration Federation took a stand against the government's directive to compel Zimbabweans to return home. Now, following this court verdict, Luke Zvt, the chairman of the Zimbabwe Immigration Federation, warmly welcomed the decision on Thursday. Now, joining us right now to discuss the South Africa's appeal court ruling in African Affairs is African Affairs analyst Farai Muvuti. Farai, I want to say thank you very much. We know this ruling was very controversial, but how big a relief is this to the Zimbabweans who reside in South Africa and call South Africa their home?
Yeah, thank you yet again for having me. I wouldn't call the ruling controversial to the public. It would be perhaps controversial to the government who were ruled to have been unconstitutional by virtue of practice and process. But in as far as the Zimbabweans are concerned, I would imagine that them being almost victims of the law or the reversal of that particular ruling, they would be jovial. But they have been going back and forth with the Home Office Department for quite some time now. And I believe you once hosted the legal representative of the ZEP holders here, Simba Chitando, who also is a columnist for the Southern African Times at times. And I think one of the arguments that they were making is that a lot of the commitment that has gone into sort of ending the permit is not a problem. The end of the permit isn't the problem. It's the request for the Zimbabweans to reverse that migration process. Yet they've offered over 10 years of their lives of labor and education to the South African institutions. They are as much as a part of the South African fabric as any other immigrant would be. And I think I think the court in this particular instance ruled accordingly.
And Farai, correct me if I'm wrong, this ruling, thanks to the Zimbabwean Immigration Federation, who actually challenged the South African Home Affairs Ministry, it will allow for a 1-year extension. Am I right? So
that is correct.
What is to be done? Because 1 year cannot be that much of a saving grace. Like you said, a lot of them have been there for decades. It would be a year of trying to figure out how to get themselves to stay. So what's being done about that?
Well, I suppose what needs to be done, and rather what civil society and other media houses are advocating for, is that the government should amend the law itself, right? And they must look at these individuals as people that are part of the South African society. They have bonds, they have what you call mortgages in other countries, and they have bank accounts, they have children, they have commitments, they have settled in the country for over 10 years. And most of them have given over 10 years of their adult life in terms of labor to that society. And they're not illegal immigrants. These are people that have been permitted to stay there within the circumstances going as far back as 2010. And some of the reasons that were presented as to the rationale why those permits were issued are still prevalent. If you look at the DHD's office, DHA's office, for example, that handles the applications of asylum seekers and so forth, they argued that they still have shortages in as far as a backlog is concerned. The circumstances relating to South Africa's political decisions, perhaps, is what one may point to as part of the rationale as to why they're acting this way in the changing sentiment within the nation. But it's not constitutional, and governments should not always act by virtue of public sentiment shifting. There should be a constitutional framework. So what should be done is a legal legislature process that should recognize these particular citizens as part of the South African society and South African fabric.
Farai, this actually probably highlights a bigger issue in terms of tolerance. We've seen xenophobia, which is rife in South Africa. This is not peculiar to South Africa alone. We've seen this thing happen in Ghana also. We've seen things like this happen in Kenya, in Liberia. How can we, Africans, be more tolerable of each other and more accommodating of each other? Because if we're always on our throats every single time and we see our African brothers as almost taking opportunities away from our own people, how can we build a united African front?
I think it's a good question, but I wouldn't leave it just to Africa alone. Just yesterday, the UK, the United Kingdom, the High Court ruled against the Home Office of the UK by virtue of the agreement to send people to Rwanda, and they deemed that to be unconstitutional. So I think what we need are stronger institutions, and we must commend the South African courts for upholding the due processes. To your question, to be more specific to your question, a lot of the growing anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa is not a majoritarian view. South Africans are not inherently Afrophobic. I don't think that is the case. What we may find is that when the political class fails to take leadership on these issues, that's where we see where you pander to a particular minority group because of electoral outcomes. So, for instance, in South Africa, there are two political parties that come to mind. South Africa First, or Action SA, and South Africa First, whose main banner and who actually gained, and also the Patriotic Front, who've gained attraction electorally and have been able to shift a lot of the the municipality seats that have unsettled the ANC. So you find that elements within the ANC, which is a ruling party, are pandering to this sort of fringe sentiment, but it is not a totalitarian or majoritarian sentiment, as it were. And I don't think it has a deciding factor apart at a national level. It's when the political class panders to it. And that can be said equally for Ghana and other countries as well that you mentioned, that when the political class fails to take leadership on such issues, then we lose the bigger subject matter, which is, for example, the AU has clear guidelines on this. The regional bodies have clear guidelines on their regional and regional integrative immigration policy. And when that is not, if those guidelines are not pursued and followed and strengthened, we then may not win the bigger fight, the broader economic fight, where Africa is leveraging the Africa Free Trade Agreement, building up our infrastructure, integrating in our labor markets. We will miss that bigger fight because of the trivia of the myopia of policymakers who are not thinking long term when it comes to African immigration.
Very well said and explained, Farai. Thank you for that. So now that the appeal court has given its ruling, is it possible that it could go farther than that? Could it be taken up to the Supreme Court?
Well, the ministry has already issued a statement saying that they will be appealing that decision. So naturally, they will appeal, and it will go as far as it possibly can. But I just don't see any legal outcome here that is going to be favorable to the ministry. And I think it's just a terrible loss of taxpayers' money and just political posturing, because he has no legal. They have lost this case more than 3 times. Exemptions have continued for the last 10 years. What happens to the well-being and the livelihoods of these very same people that they continuously, persistently take to court and leave them in limbo? Bear in mind that during these processes, some of these people lose their bank accounts. Some of these people lose their livelihoods because they can no longer work. And so these people's lives have been at the behest of a government official who is acting in a posthumous way, which does not actually help in terms of the productivity of the case moving forward. They should spend more time in Parliament amending the bill and creating a situation in which they can increase their labor market. Because the studies show that the immigration sentiments that are being shared are incorrect. The myth that immigrants are taking jobs is incorrect. Studies demonstrate that immigrants actually add to jobs, don't take away. right? The sentiment that they're thieves equally is incorrect. So there's such a huge gap of insight that I think the government should work towards building.
All right, Farai, is this almost like a challenge for President Emerson Mnangagwa? Because we know they're going to head into the polls. Is it like a challenge to them, or should they take this as a challenge to help build and also stabilize the Zimbabwean economy so that some of those people can say enough is enough, I'm going back home, because opportunities are actually popping up in Zimbabwe, whereby no one will be able to disenfranchise me, or no one will be able to stigmatize against me?
I worry about this sentiment. Why? It somewhat excuses other lawmakers from other countries to flaunt their own laws. You see, when I migrate, people migrate for different reasons. And if you examine people that do research on migration levels relative to issues relating to climate change, for instance, people are migrating for that, and equally for economic reasons, and equally for political reasons, as you may point out. But it's no excuse for a country that has set laws to flaunt its own laws purely because you're saying your argument is that you need to go and fix your own country. We don't live in it's not a banana republic. Civilized societies should think in a civil way. If the laws suggest that when one migrates, these are the laws that guide them. And remember, bear in mind, these are not illegal immigrants. These are immigrants who actually have paperwork. They have reason to be there. They have commitments there. Whatever happens in Zimbabwe is immaterial, because what they have chosen is to settle in that particular country. Some of them have their commitments there. Zimbabwe, whatever happens to Zimbabwe as far as its economy and so forth, should not have a bearing on the judicial processes that a government in South Africa should pursue.
Well, Farai Muvuti, the CEO of South African Times, great conversation here. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing that with us.